We are beginning to run a little bit late, so I'll hand over straight away to John for the final talk this morning. And John is the author of the third volume in the series, which focuses on the Southwest. So over to you, John, and thanks to Kirsten.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. You're going to hear quite a lot of, well, some repetition in this. This presentation is going to be it's going to be cover about 150 years of the Earldom of Pembroke up to about 1250. It's going to be a very high level view, one that interspersed with anecdotes, but the whole point of this talk is not to necessarily fill you on anything you may not know already, to just give you an introduction to the area, the southwest of Wales, how it came about, and hopefully leaving you want to learn more so that when the second volume of the book is published towards the end of next year or early the year after, you'll be enticed to buy it. First of all, I do want to apologize for any misinterpretations or any oversimplifications. And also, as opposed to some of the other talks here, this is going to be a very Anglo-Norman centric chat. Anyway, so Norman conquest beyond the frontier. What do we mean by beyond the frontier? Well, when one looks at the march, a march is generally a fluid geographic of two regions. As you've heard already a couple of times, following the Norman conquest, there was a march created by William when the three earldoms were created along the Welsh border, roughly along Ulphus Dyke. So how come in Southwest Wales, which is not on the border, does that become part of the March of Wales? Well, the answer is oversimplified, but basically the Normans created it by taking it and conquering it. And we'll look at how they did that, how they developed it, how they entrenched it, and how it became a march. This is the southwest of Wales. Here's Pembroke. And I guess when you look at this, I want you to see where it's a very remote corner, but its advantages are it's access to the sea. It's also a very defensible area, and you'll see it was very well defendable. What I would like you also to kind of note is there are the other Marcher Lordships around. Caermaes here, Kilgarran here, St. Clair Narberth. This is the area of the bishops of St. David, which were Marcher Lords in their own right. And over here is Carmarthenshire with the Royal Castle of Carmarthen. We're not going to have time to go through all the ups and downs. That would be in the book, but just so you know, this area is all very fluid throughout the history. So as Kirsten has just gone through, post-conquest, there was a lot of infighting in Wales. There was a lot of bloodletting, and in 1081, Rhys Tudor basically rose above all the rest of them, having won the battle that Kirsten mentioned. Immediately upon winning that battle and being effectively the king of Deheubarth, or Prince of Deheubarth, William the Conqueror comes over, rides over there's two different versions of it. The Welsh call it a pilgrimage, the Norman chroniclers a military show of force. In any case, he meets Rhys and makes him de facto justiciar of Deheubarth. He's for his tribute, for sign of loyalty and for £40 a year, which is documented in Domesday Book. He is a ruler of Deheubarth. Now, the bigger event is actually 1087, because that's when William dies. And it's quite clear that before this, William didn't really have much interest in pursuing gains into Wales, but his successor, William Rufus, did. And that may be because of the rebellion in 1088, or it may just be that the pressure was beginning to build. But anyway, this pressure was building around Brecon. Rhys Tudor is ranging around Brecon. He confronts some Normans and he's killed in battle. And that event in 1093 is generally considered the beginning of the conquest of Southwest Wales. So we see the Montgomerys are the ones that do it, and they come from here, and they've been exploring up the Severn Valley. They then come all the way down here and establish their castle at Pembroke in 1093. At the same time, the sheriffs of Devon are coming up here and they establish castles in what is now very near Carmarthen. And there are castles basically everywhere. But within a year, as the Brute says, the Welsh were unable to bear the tyranny and injustice of the French, only within a year. And very shortly thereafter, all the castles apart from Pembroke here and I believe it's pronounced Rhys near Carmarthen, are the only two that managed to withstand the Welsh fight back. He's and what's quite significant about it is as time goes, in 1096, Arnulf of Montgomery, the conqueror of Pembroke, for lack of a better word, is replaced at the castle by his castellan, and that's Gerald of Windsor. And there's some great stories in the that are told by Gerald of Wales, his Gerald of Windsor's grandson, about how he managed to defend Pembroke by throwing bacon over the walls and releasing a letter that was leaked to the Welsh that he had plenty of supplies, and they go away. So that whether that's true or not, it's in the folklore now. And in any case, what is true, Gerald was definitely there, and Pembroke didn't fall. Now, as the pressure begins to ease, William Rufus is killed in a hunting accident in 1100, and Henry I becomes king. And things change dramatically from that point on. So the first major thing that happens after Henry becomes king is that the Montgomerys join a rebellion against Henry I. Robert, Henry's brother, comes over to England, but isn't really prepared. There's no battle, and there's a truce without any fighting. Unfortunately, the Montgomerys is well known. They were supporting Robert, and Henry, it doesn't take him long to round on them. And Arnulf of Montgomery is basically out by 1102. He has to go into exile. His brother in Shrewsbury, they have to go into exile, and the Montgomerys basically disappear from the scene. One interesting note was that Arnulf had married an Irish princess, and he was trying to gather an Irish army before, but I think the might of Henry I, everyone got sense that there was never a battle, and the Montgomerys basically disappear from the scene. So from 1101, then it becomes quite settled. Henry's a very formidable king. You begin to see other lordships. I saw you, Camis, the Fitzmartins come in up there. Gerald of Windsor, he begins to make a big career. He marries Nest, who had been a mistress of Henry I, but she was a daughter of Rhys Tudor. So consolidating the Welsh connections there. Gerald of Windsor is already married a Welsh princess already back in 1100. We see a royal castle in Carmarthen built by 1109. The sheriff of Devon, he passes away, but then other lords come in, and we start to see that whole area begins settling. But what really happens is in about 1107-08, in this area here around Rhys, Haverford, a large immigration of Flemish settlers, and they come in and they more or less dispossess the Welsh. And all along the sea coast along here, it becomes almost Welsh free, if you will, because the Flemish hate the Welsh and vice versa, and the Welsh are pushed further back inland. And it's not a coincidence in later times, this was called Little England because they'd done such a good job. All along the coast here, there were the Marcher Lordships. You saw them in Philip's maps. Those were the ones that were able to withstand trouble because they were able to be resupplied by the sea. Further in, it was far more fragile. And it became fragile in 1135 after the death of Henry I. There were massive uprisings. The Richard de Clare incident was one of the reasons, was one of the things that they say started it off. But there are plenty of examples of that where pressure was building, and it's possible that there would have been a Welsh uprising anyway. However, after Henry's death, Stephen of Blois takes over the throne in front of the daughter Matilda of Henry I, and his issue, he's more interested in consolidating his gains, and he just ignores Wales. So there are some major issues. One of them was a battle near Cardigan, where Flemish, Norman knights all set off to meet the Welsh, and were soundly defeated by a combined army of Deheubarth and Gwynedd, and really set them back. The Welsh came all the way down to Pembroke and Haverford, and Kilgarran disappears at the time, and there's no real, and Cardigan falls except for the castle, and poor Richard de Clare's wife gets stuck there, surrounded by the Welsh. In fact, they kept finding it difficult to take the castles, and that's why the Normans are able to hang on. But they take a lot of them, but not all of them. But in any case, Stephen's succession leads to civil war. Many of the Marcher barons side with Matilda, probably because Stephen has left them to their own devices. They don't, any enterprise at this time, for example, the rescue of Richard de Clare's wife, there was an enterprise to go and try and relieve Carmarthen. Any enterprise at this time is undertaken by the Marchers with no royal help. In 1138, Gilbert de Clare, Richard's brother, is made Earl of Pembroke. He's created the Earldom of Pembroke. Arnulf had sometimes been called Earl of Pembroke, but there's no evidence that there was even an earldom at the time. But he's Earl of Pembroke, and I think Stephen must have hoped he was going to go and relieve it. But the only time he actually visited Wales at all, or Pembroke, was in 1145. We know he goes to Carmarthen. We know he goes as far as, we know he goes to Carmarthen. We know he builds a castle there, and he builds a castle at a place called, I think, Pencada, which is near the southern part of Cardiganshire. But he shores everything up, and he leaves to go back to court because that's where all the action is. That's where he's going to make his fame in the Civil War. By 1146, it's all lost again. The Welsh are too strong, and without royal help, the Marcher Lords really, they're just fighting. They're just hanging on at this stage. Things change then in 1154. We're not going to go through the whole history of Henry II and how he comes through. There's just not enough time, but most of you should be familiar with that. Henry becomes the next king, and he looks to establish, he wants things to go back as they were in 1135. I should mention that Gilbert de Clare did die in, I had it there on the last slide, I think it was 1148, and his son, Richard Strongbow, they were both known as Strongbow, but Richard de Clare, he is an Earl of Pembroke. He's actually witnessed his charters as Earl of Pembroke from 1148 until 1154. Now, there's been some very interesting articles about this. Henry came in and he wanted to get control back. And one thing he'd realized what Stephen had created too many new earls. And so he reduced the number of earldoms, and Pembroke was one of those. And he takes it back into royal hands. Richard is left then with Chepstow and some of his English ones. Basically the prospects become not as good for him without the Pembroke earldom. The other thing at this time is that the Lord Rhys begins to rise. Now, it's, once again, far too complicated for a 30-minute talk, and a fascinating piece of history is how Henry II and Lord Rhys joust, they fight battles, but in the end, come around 1170, Lord Rhys is pretty much on the good side. Henry's lost interest. I mean, I might be stepping over the bounds of historical fact there. He seems to have kind of lost interest in trying to do anything with Wales, and he's much more happy to try and establish some kind of status quo. And the Lord Rhys, he establishes as his justiciar. So the bottom line to all that is that he's that the prospects for an enterprising Norman are greatly diminished in with the rise of the powerful Welsh. So at about this time, the King of Leinster comes through, and he's been deposed by another Irish king. He offers Richard de Clare the hand of his daughter, and he offers the hand of his daughter and basically the kingdom if he can come back and help him win it. And thus begins a great Norman enterprise where you see loads of these Marcher Lords and their kids going over to Ireland and setting it up. And that's a whole nother story, but a very interesting story. But what happens is Wales at this time then is pretty much under the control of Lord Rhys and Henry's oversight. Make no mistake, he got it back to 1135. So Camus and a few of those, they become lordships again with the Lord Rhys as the protector. And by the way, that's the coat of arms of de Clare and Chepstow Castle, just in case you're wondering what you're looking at there. Then Richard de Clare, he dies in Ireland. His heir dies in 1185. His son was a minor. I don't want to go too much into Henry II in Ireland, but needless to say, throughout, he does become a Lord of Leinster. And so Isabel becomes the heir of all this. She has Leinster, she has Chepstow, but not Pembroke. That's now in royal hands. William Marshall, who you see his coat of arms and the tomb effigy that's in Temple Church, he's obviously, everyone knows his history, and I don't have enough time to go through all that, but he, a loyal servant of the Angevins. What's most important was towards the end when King Henry was absolutely harried by his son Richard and he was being besieged all around, William stayed loyal to him. There's the famous story about him covering his escape from burning Le Mans and unhorsing him. Henry had promised Isabel to William, And when Henry dies, obviously there's some concern about whether they will see it through. But Richard was so taken by William's loyalty that he immediately gives him all the papers he needs, and he gives him the hand of Isabel. I think it's one of the more interesting parts of medieval history that William Marshal certainly did not hang around very long to wait. He was straight into Normandy, stealing his land, straight across over, and he went to Isabel as fast as he could, and they are married. For the first 9 years of the marriage, he is basically only what Richard de Clare was. He is Earl of Chepstow and Strigul, whereas and Lord of Leinster. But then Richard dies in a minor siege of a French castle where he gets an infection from an arrow wound, and then you have a situation where King John is where John it wants to be king, but his nephew Arthur has potentially a better argument for it. So there's some debate between the clergy and the nobility. But the story goes that William Marshal was very much on the side of King John, very much pushed for it, and everybody in the end goes for John to be the new king. And very shortly thereafter, William Marshal is made Earl of Pembroke by John. So loyalty certainly had its rewards. Let's see. When he becomes the Earl of Pembroke, he does go over to Wales very quickly, and it's interesting because one thing that you learn when you read about this, there's not a lot of information out there on these Marcher Lordships. There's not a lot of records, but you do get a glimpse that when he was there, he went and he used his good favor right away to get the citizens of Pembroke they got freedom of toll right away. They were allowed a new midsummer fair. He began to support some religious houses, including Pembroke and Pill Priory. But more significantly, and this is all the while, there's a very big picture going on on the European stage, where John is about to lose his Norman estates, but William is balancing holding his lands in Leinster and Pembroke with that his role there too. But in 1204 he shows up and immediately takes back some of the lands that the Lord Rhys had not given back, and said these were Henry II said give these, and he takes them. He also begins construction of the mighty stone keep at Pembroke, which is a nice picture of that on your screens. There were some stories about whether that was inspired by his crusade, whether that was from the Crusader castle he's seen, but it's very hard to prove that. There's no evidence to that, and it could be just as likely that he's got that from some of the French castles, including Chateau Gaillard, which is a magnificent defensive structure. In 1206, John had lost Normandy, and William Marshal falls out of favor, and he kind of goes quiet here. And even the famous history of William Marshal doesn't really mention Pembroke very often, and it's quite confusing. It's not quite clear why he doesn't mention it, but there are various theories that I don't have time to go into. But in any case, he goes a little bit quiet in the stage, and he starts to spend his time over in Ireland. He sees once again he's got better chances of making a mark there, and he spends a lot of time in Leinster. That picture, by the way, is part of Pill Priory, which is now somebody's backyard. I found it very interesting to go see where it was, but that was just across from Pembroke, and the reason it's there is because it was one of the priories that the Marshals gave money to and supported. Once again, we can't go through the big picture of what's going on, but needless to say, everyone knows. As we get closer to Magna Carta and rebellion, William begins to get back more in favor. They never had a full breach of their relationship. It just cooled down. And when John needed more friends, William was there. And then when John dies, William was made regent, as we know, and he's a big supporter and a big reason why Henry III gets to the throne. I think in terms of Pembroke, what's important was during the Civil War, and once again, forgive for pronunciation, the Welsh under Clan ap Iorwerth, they reconquered large parts of Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire. They get right down to Pembroke and Haverford, and probably would have taken Haverford if the Bishop of St. David's hadn't negotiated a substantial ransom to keep them from burning it down. So they were able to basically overran the whole area. As you will know, the king was in no position to fight back at that stage, and they just had to accept it. William Marshal dies then in 1219. William Marshal the Younger, you think, well, how can it get any better than that? Well, William the Marshal the Younger was quite a formidable chap in his own right. Upon attaining his inheritance, he was frustrated that a lot of it was being controlled by Cullen. There were treaties made, but Cullen made no move to get rid of them, to give the possessions back. And so William Marshal the Younger, who has signed a peace treaty with him and goes to Ireland, and the day the peace treaty expires, lands with an invading force in 1223, and basically sweeps all the way up through all his lands, right into Cardigan, and takes it, and takes Carmarthen Castle and settles that matter once and for all, pretty much. The Welsh don't really until much later have the ability to come back and try and take it. The picture there is Kilgarran Castle. That was one of the last ones that he was able to take, and that then became part of the Marshal Earldom. And just to show how important he was on the national stage, he was married to the king's sister, who was about 9 at the time, so there was no issue from that one. Richard Marshal, he's interesting because he was supposed to have all the French lands. He'd been given all the Norman lands and the marshals there, but because it was very complicated still, it was all very fluid. Henry III thought he was going to get those lands back at some stage, so he was always a bit suspicious of the marshals. But when the earldom came up, Richard went straight down, paid his homage to Henry III. There has been some suspicion that his lands were withheld, but modern historians seem to agree that Richard was able to pretty much ascend to his earldom without too much delay. He became embroiled in a brief rebellion. Henry III, as if you've been reading David Carpenter's recent book, he dumped Hubert de Burgh, his previous justiciar, for various reasons, and he went back to an old confidant of his father, Peter de Roche. But Peter de Roche, realizing he could get away with what he wanted to, also overstepped the bounds, and one of Richard's men was basically deprived of land that he'd been promised, and this started a brief rebellion. A lot of it centered around Usk Castle, which you can see the picture of there. It was never broad-based. He was never joined by any of the other major earls, but it was certainly a thorn in the side. And what it did do, after Richard died fighting in Ireland, probably through treachery, he was a popular figure, and Henry III did get rid of Peter de Roche and began to rule on his own. Into the Marshal line, Gilbert, I'm not going to go through too much. He was supposed to have a career in the church, but of course, nobody really expected that all his brothers were going to die without heirs. So he's made Earl. He loved a tournament. He ends up dying in a tournament, and here's a picture of Matthew Paris that Matthew Paris drew of Gilbert. He was dragged by his horse after being unseated and died of his wounds there. The key thing was that following the rebellion, Gilbert was able to reconcile with the king, but he was also very haughty. He tried to make all the Welsh that were under him pay homage to him, and of course the king wanted the Welsh leaders to pay homage to him. It gets very complicated, but in the end, they have a working relationship, but not a friendly relationship. And then Walter, he's similar, but he's also in the king's service in France in 1242, but he died after a short illness in 1245. And that basically left it to where they finished up, which is 5 Marshal sons, and all died without a male heir, which meant it had to go to the surviving daughters and granddaughters of William Marshal. And let's see, I only want to focus on 2 of those. First one, I'm going to go out of order from the slide. The first one, William de Valence, who's the brother, the half-brother of Henry III. He becomes Earl of Pembroke by right of his marriage to Joan, who's one of the daughters, a granddaughter. And the Mortimers obtained Narberth. And if you're paying attention to Philip's slide, where it showed all the Mortimer lands, you would have seen a little blue area in the southwest. That was Narberth. They got that inheritance. where the three daughters get three different lordships. And that is a picture of Narberth there that you can see on your screen. I think what the interesting thing about this was that at the time of the Marshal's death, Pembroke was in control. And they had, as it says here, all knights, all free tenants were required to hold suit in the county court, as they had in the time of the Marshals, and all commerce ran through that earldom. So when Valence became earl, he expected it to stay that way. Of course, that's not what happened, and that's another story, because with people like the Mortimers and the Boons, it was never going to be that way. So just really quickly, I think I've got about 2 minutes. The March in Southwest Wales was created by a Norman invasion in 1093, and it was consolidated by Henry I. That's a bit oversimplified, but that is pretty much how it happened. It was following the death of Henry I, it became a very fluid situation, but Pembroke never fell, and that anchor of Pembroke kept the area under Norman control. The earldom was as much in royal hands in the 12th century as it was an earldom. But once the Marshals became earls, it remained an earldom, even if some of those earls were absentee landlords. They were also extremely generally important people, and that anchor of Pembroke made them even more so and even richer. So at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to study Pembroke in great detail because there's not a lot of written records, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence around it, a lot of anecdotal stories and some fascinating stories. And I hope that you'll take this talk and get more interested in it and look at it, because it's a fascinating part of history and a fascinating part of the country.